Adam Schiff built a political empire by selling a ghost to the American public, yet it took just one silent graph and a retired school teacher to expose this $80 million grift to 26 million viewers. That staggering view count is more than just a number. It is the undeniable metric of a total political collapse. The definitive cultural moment of this spectacle was not an emotional constituent story or shouted financial metrics. Instead, it was the silent, damning efficiency of a synchronized graph. The electorate instantly absorbed this visual proof. Every media appearance acted as a puppet string, jerking the financial metrics upward in a synchronized dance of deception. The data required absolutely zero narration. The correlation itself served as the executioner. A simple graphic materialized on the chamber, monitors tracking two distinct metrics. A blue trajectory map network hits that deployed the promise of proof. A red trajectory tracked the subsequent influx of donor capital. The synchronization was flawless. The lines rose and fell in perfect unison, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that the rhetoric served entirely as retail inventory rather than legitimate informational updates. Whenever the sales pitch intensified, the cash register overflowed. The moment the pitch stalled, the revenue violently dried up. Every single hit across the major networks triggered an immediate financial transaction. This formed a chart that ultimately tracked a staggering $80 million haul. Over a 7-year span, one politician methodically extracted $80 million from 2.4 million individual contributors. The terminology was solely manufactured as a highly profitable consumer product. The human collateral damage of this cynical operation is utterly devastating. This is perfectly illustrated by a constituent named Brenda Holloway. She is a retired mail carrier living in the witness's own home state of California. She dedicated 31 years of her life to civil service. Today, she survives on a fixed monthly pension of exactly $2,800. Driven by a deep sense of civic duty, she consumed cable news nightly. She decided to siphon $25 a month from her meager income to support his campaign apparatus. Over an 8-year stretch, she surrendered a total of $2,400. Eventually granting a local television interview from her kitchen, she sat flanked by a cynical campaign magnate preaching the value of truth. There, she articulated a raw, profound betrayal. She was merely a working-class citizen who blindly trusted an elite official. She sacrificed her funds out of a genuine belief that he was the sole beacon of honesty in Washington. In reality, she quite literally purchased a subscription to his narrative. She financed a storyline that federal authorities eventually confirmed was a total fabrication. Federal investigators completely obliterated that narrative. She was left financially depleted with absolutely no avenue for recourse. Her quiet heartbreak pulled 5 million views online. It reflected the ordinary pain of over 2.4 million citizens who suddenly realized they had financed a phantom menace. They had bankrolled a disciplined elite who peddled fictions they could never refund. This stark realization struck a devastating chord across the entire electorate. To fully grasp this collapse, we must rewind the tape to understand exactly how Mike Johnson exposed this reality. The story begins earlier that morning. The former intelligence chairman strutted into the chamber, carrying the distinct arrogance of someone eager to dominate a deposition. He tucked a dossier firmly under his arm and displayed a hardened jawline. He projected the highly practiced swagger of an ex-prosecutor who dedicated 6 years to incarcerating citizens and still treats the world like his personal witness stand. He took his position at the microphone, possessing seamless muscle memory. He moved like a veteran operator who treats mahogany desks and press podiums as organic extensions of his own anatomy. Ostensibly framed as an oversight inquiry regarding structural changes to the intelligence apparatus, this gathering relegated the recently minted senator to the opposing side of the table he had commanded for nearly a decade. The Louisiana representative held the gavel. The opening statement delivered by the witness unfolded immediately as a 4-minute masterclass in preemptive defense. He clearly recognized the unspoken subtext anchoring the entire room. Every inquiry orbiting his career since 2017 inevitably circled back to Moscow, the subsequent probe, and that single defining noun. He fully anticipated the ambush. He leaned into the microphone and deliberately threw the initial punch to dictate the combat tempo. Addressing the dais, he bypassed the slated agenda entirely. He asserted his presence had nothing to do with systemic reform. Instead, it served as retribution for his past warnings about foreign electoral interference, effectively doubling down on every single past claim. He pivoted sharply to attack the moral standing of the presiding officer. He labeled the chairman profoundly hypocritical for challenging the transfer of power while simultaneously lecturing others on institutional integrity. It was a surgical strike that sucked the oxygen right out of the chamber. The audience was left holding their breath, waiting for the metaphorical pin to drop. Out in the corridors, his political operatives celebrated what they believed was a definitive victory. They relished the sight of their boss wielding his signature prosecutorial tone. This specific vocal rhythm historically generated unparalleled revenue streams per spoken syllable. His communications staff was undoubtedly queuing up the next digital tin cup before the echo even died in the chamber. The unvarnished reality about this specific politician is incredibly simple. His entire public persona operates as a cash register, turning routine congressional oversight into infinite campaign rallies. Over a 7-year span, he peddled the promise of proof exactly 212 separate times across cable news networks. This functioned as a calculated trigger. It prompted his operatives to blast out contribution links a mere 20 minutes later. However, a forensic review of the broadcast exposes a critical miscalculation. The realization hit the California Democrat roughly 40 seconds into the proceeding. He deployed his rehearsed soundbite regarding the Capitol riot with flawless political theater explicitly designed to keep the donor class reaching for their wallets. Yet he unwittingly handed the speaker a weapon. When that golden noun left the witness' lips, the speaker did not flinch or scowl. He simply offered a subtle, knowing glance. It was the look of a strategist watching his prey willingly step into a meticulously rigged snare. This specific avenue of retaliation remained sealed unless the target triggered the tripwire. The target happily obliged. Possessing a granular understanding of this exact operation, the speaker chose to bypass the predictable election debates entirely. Johnson systematically cracked open a physical ledger, laying bare every single digital solicitation attempt. Methodically adjusting his spectacles, the chairman unclasped a thick folio. He projected the eerie calm of an educator who spent 17 years mastering the art of the delayed intellectual strike. Utilizing a flat, measured tone, he homed in on that specific terminology. He reminded the room that both men held law degrees and understood the rigid judicial parameters separating concrete proof from partisan rhetoric. Demanding clarity on behalf of the public, he pushed the witness to define his historical language. Did it adhere to strict courtroom standards or merely function as a cynical mechanism to extract campaign cash? Back in the hallway, the atmosphere shattered. The rapid clicking of the press secretary's keyboard abruptly halted. Staring at the monitor as the realization set in, they saw the presiding officer ignore the election bait entirely. He opted instead to handle the core terminology with the clinical precision of a detective bagging forensic material at a crime scene. A panic text was swiftly dispatched to the campaign's top attorney containing a grim warning that the chairman was establishing a rigid legal framework. The congressman normally wields a slick retort for any incoming fire. Now he found his arsenal entirely empty. He was confronted with his own financial ledger, read aloud by a man who previously spent his days grading high school civics exams. Far from raw aggression, the recitation from the dossier was deployed with calculated pacing. The speaker built an inescapable logical perimeter, brick by rhetorical brick. Starting with a CNN broadcast from the 22nd of March 2017, the then chairman explicitly guaranteed the public about the information in his possession. He claimed it was not merely circumstantial, but definitively direct. By removing all ambiguity from the historical record, he highlighted the total absence of qualifiers or caveats in those televised guarantees. The prosecution continued relentlessly. He cited a Valentine's Day hit on MSNBC the following year that claimed abundant public proof regarding illicit coordination. This was seamlessly followed by an April 2019 appearance on ABC News declaring the conspiracy lived in plain sight. These three separate declarations spanned three different networks over 3 years. They were laid out sequentially, mirroring an instructor aligning flawed student essays against an unyielding grading rubric. Then came the devastating reality check. The chairman dropped the findings of the April 2019 special counsel report. It had failed to establish any coordinated conspiracy with foreign operatives. Next, he stacked on the December findings from the Inspector General, detailing 17 glaring procedural failures regarding domestic surveillance warrants. He finished the sequence with the May 2023 Durham conclusion. That final report determined federal law enforcement launched the entire apparatus improperly based on unprocessed and unverified rumors. The contrast was blinding. 3 televised promises guaranteeing the existence of a smoking gun slammed directly into 3 official findings, confirming an empty chamber. 3 separate federal probes ultimately concluded this promised smoking gun was a ghost. What elevates this from routine political spin to calculated deception is a single damning fact. The man making these network rounds held a security clearance. He possessed exclusive access to classified briefings that directly contradicted his primetime talking points. Peering over the dais while displaying zero theatrical outrage, the speaker radiated quiet fascination. He looked like a proctor catching a pupil flagrantly violating academic integrity rules, simply wishing to hear the subsequent rationalization. Leaning forward, he reminded the witness of his background incarcerating citizens. A seasoned litigator inherently grasped the vast chasm separating a casual allegation from authenticated courtroom materials. He stressed that the concepts of direct versus circumstantial proof are not fluid partisan ideas. They are rigid doctrines cemented in every introductory legal curriculum across the nation. The core accusation was laid bare. The politician deliberately deployed the highest tier of legal certainty on camera while secretly consuming restricted documents that debunked his own narrative. The trap snapped shut with a binary demand. When you peddled that specific word 212 times across 14 networks spanning 37 months, were you adhering to the statutory definition or inventing a profitable alternative? Relying on deeply ingrained survival instincts, the target lunged for the microphone to pivot and attack. He attempted to discard the Durham conclusions as professionally discredited. Simultaneously, he tried to relitigate the nuances of the initial foreign contact probe. The chairman cut through the deflection instantly. He volleyed the identical question back over the net with zero variation in speed or placement, demanding a simple affirmative or negative regarding the statutory definition. It was an absolute checkmate scenario. Conceding a loose interpretation amounted to a confession of mass public deception. Claiming strict legal adherence equated to outright perjury against the combined weight of 3 federal inquiries. The usually silver-tongued partisan found himself physically sputtering. He opened and closed his mouth in a display of visible shock. This carried a unique poetic justice for a man who built his brand interrogating others. Unfazed, the presiding officer calmly flipped to the next section of his dossier. He pivoted the interrogation away from abstract rhetoric directly into the cold reality of hard currency. It was finally time to quantify the exact monetary value of that repeated promise. Illuminating a highly organized financial machine, the official regulatory filings showed the campaign vacuumed up $14.3 million during the height of the media blitz in 2018. This was followed by an additional $12.7 million during the exact year the special counsel evaporated the conspiracy theory. Even by 2020, long after the file was shut, the machine yielded another $16.4 million. The exposure of the fallacy did not crash the stock. It actually drove the market higher, proving the rhetoric had morphed from an informational claim into a highly addictive lifestyle brand. The timeline grew even darker, hitting the second quarter of 2023. The chamber formally reprimanded the witness for actively deceiving the nation based on the Durham findings regarding raw, unverified data. Holding aloft a physical printout, the chairman highlighted a grim reality. Right in the middle of the actual floor vote to condemn his actions, the political machine blasted out another urgent plea for cash. Reading directly from the digital solicitation script, the plea explicitly framed the disciplinary action as a partisan smear. It begged supporters to fund his immediate defense. That single act of monetization during an ethics reprimand triggered an $8.2 million windfall, cementing a historic fundraising quarter. In essence, the very act of being disciplined for dispensing fiction became the single most lucrative event of his existence. Expertly tying the macroeconomic data back to the retired postal worker, the speaker illustrated a painful truth. Her $25 tithe fueled an operation that charged its base a premium for the original deception and the subsequent fallout of getting caught. At this point, the tenor in the room shifted dramatically. The folksy educator vanished, leaving behind a cold, calculating constitutional attorney to lower the temperature and escalate the stakes. He deliberately moved the conversation out of the realm of partisan bickering and into the chilling territory of legal liability. He emphasized the suspect's previous role at the helm of the Intelligence Committee. He noted the undeniable access to top-secret assessments, explicitly outlining the total absence of verifiable traction in the foreign collusion narrative. His televised declarations functioned in direct opposition to the restricted briefings sitting on his desk. This fact was firmly corroborated by 3 separate government inquiries. Yet, those known falsehoods served as the foundational bedrock for a massive nationwide solicitation effort that extracted $80 million over 7 years. Every electronic communication heavily leaned on the ongoing probe, constantly insinuating his exclusive clearance justified the financial bleeding of the working class. Dropping the hammer, the chairman cited Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343. He meticulously outlined the federal statute for wire fraud. Flawlessly mapping the requirements, he listed them engineering a scheme to deceive, dispensing material misrepresentations, utilizing electronic broadcast, and harboring the intent to acquire capital. The subject leveraged cable broadcasts and mass emails to successfully secure $80 million. This was based entirely on the misrepresentation of a smoking gun his own classified briefings told him did not exist. Carefully disclaiming any formal prosecutorial role, the Speaker stated he was merely aligning undisputed facts with statutory elements. He bolstered the argument by introducing the public analysis of a former Federal Election Commission official. This official stated unequivocally that sufficient grounds existed to trigger a civil probe and a serious review by the Justice Department. The mathematical contrast was staggering. Taxpayers absorbed a $32 million bill to investigate a shadow, while one politician generated an $80 million fortune merely by claiming the shadow was real. After acknowledging that the legally defined proof never materialized, the chairman removed his spectacles. He cleaned them with deliberate slowness, like an instructor preparing to deliver the ultimate moral of the curriculum. Returning to the retired mail carrier, he noted her $2,400 sacrifice was born entirely from naive trust. She believed a former litigator would handle courtroom terminology with absolute integrity. Ultimately, that weaponized trust built an $80 million empire for the political elite while leaving the working-class donor completely depleted. Closing the loop, the Speaker compared the systemic operation to a student peddling fake exam answers for profit and offense, warranting immediate expulsion rather than a promotion. Naturally, the cornered partisan attempted a counteroffensive. This operator previously broke organized crime figures on the stand. He possessed too much ego to absorb a public dressing down from a former Shreveport educator without retaliating. Elevating the drama, he rose to his feet. He utilized physical posturing to mask the devastating reality of his compromised position. He dismissed the entire framework as a standard ideological clash rather than a statutory breach. He claimed he merely offered a subjective assessment based on his personal beliefs. This attempted to dilute the accusations into a matter of reasonable analytical differences. Framing the fraud allegations as an insult to the judicial profession, it was a slick, calculated pivot. It was designed to downgrade deliberate deception into a harmless error in judgment and wrap the entire scandal in a cloak of plausible deniability. This exact rhetorical escape hatch had successfully navigated him through 7 years of intense media scrutiny. The chairman simply offered a tight, knowing nod, signaling absolute anticipation of the excuse. Immediately dismantling the defense, he explained that an assessment implies an educated guess built upon fragmented data. It is much like a physician diagnosing an illness without a clear scan. The fatal flaw in the defense was the historical record. The politician never couched his media hits in uncertainty. Instead, he explicitly guaranteed the public that the smoking gun was not circumstantial but direct. Boasting it sat in plain view. Mercilessly driving home a final point, the chairman stated a seasoned attorney understands the vast difference between an analytical guess and an absolute declaration of fact. This is especially true when those declarations blatantly contradict restricted intelligence files sitting securely in a congressional safe. Calling it a simple disagreement was a farce. It was the calculated action of a cleared official broadcasting fiction to the masses while secretly reviewing the contradictory truth. This generated an $80 million windfall in the process. Stripped of his swagger, the target slowly sank back into his chair. He resembled a defeated litigator who just watched opposing counsel weaponize his own flimsy defense mechanism to expose an inescapable vulnerability. The analytical subjectivity shield shattered on impact, destroyed by his own historical soundbites. It proved that feigning uncertainty holds no water when past rhetoric guaranteed absolute conviction. Expressing false conviction while holding the keys to the actual truth transcends political spin and enters the realm of federal code violations. Flipping to the final section of the dossier, the chairman captured a stunned, heavy silence from the gallery. He prepared to deliver the ultimate visual strike, mapping the direct synergy between the relentless media saturation and the corresponding financial explosion over that lucrative 7-year window. A devastatingly simple graphic materialized on the chamber, monitors tracking 2 distinct metrics. A blue trajectory mapped network hits deploying the promise of proof, and a red trajectory tracked the massive influx of donor capital. The synchronization was flawless. Lines rose and fell in perfect unison, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that the rhetoric served entirely as retail inventory rather than informational updates. Whenever the sales pitch intensified, the cash register overflowed. When the pitch stalled, the revenue dried up. Every single hit across the major networks triggered an immediate financial transaction. The retired postal worker consumed those exact broadcasts and opened her wallet accordingly. Expanding her single tragedy across a vast network of 2.4 million individual contributors perfectly calculates the $80 million haul. This cements the reality that the terminology was solely manufactured as a highly profitable consumer product. Sealing the dossier and folding his spectacles with the quiet finality of a professor dismissing a class, the speaker delivered the concluding verdict. He reflected on the target's initial remarks regarding integrity and agreed that the irony was indeed suffocating. The very individual who spent nearly a decade weaponizing the justice system and demanding elite accountability shamelessly peddled a known fabrication. He did this to over 2.4 million citizens to enrich his political machine to the tune of $80 million. While the promised smoking gun was an illusion, the financial haul was incredibly real. It left the working-class pensioner from California stranded, waiting for a revelation that will never arrive. The truth was never actually on the market, only the illusion of it. Offered a chance to rebut, the shattered partisan retreated to tired, abstract platitudes about democratic threats and institutional courage. He noticeably dodged any mention of the massive financial haul, the exploited mail carrier, the damning synchronized graph, or the shameless cash grabs executed during his own disciplinary hearings. Seeking refuge in empty buzzwords regarding duty, the spell was completely broken. The audience finally recognized his moral posturing as nothing more than a hollow, overpriced commodity that federal investigators ultimately debunked entirely. Offering no further commentary, the presiding officer checked the time to note that a mere 43 minutes had fundamentally dismantled a political empire. Before an audience of 7 million viewers, a quiet former teacher systematically re-educated a combative veteran litigator on the devastating consequences of his own weaponized vocabulary. Out in the corridor, the campaign's lead propagandist stared blankly at a drafted plea for cash resting on his phone screen and slowly deleted the solicitation. The operation historically performed perfectly, but the curtain had finally been pulled back. It exposed the predatory mechanics of the 20-minute donation cycle to the entire voting public. Once the predatory machinery is exposed, the operator has no choice but to power it down. The fallout completely bypassed predictable partisan spin. The definitive cultural moment was neither the emotional constituent story nor the staggering financial metrics. It was the silent efficiency of the synchronized data chart, which racked up an astonishing 26 million views in mere days. Instantly, the electorate absorbed the visual proof. Every media appearance acted as a puppet string, directly jerking the financial metrics upward in a synchronized dance of deception. Without requiring any narration, the correlation itself served as the executioner. Meanwhile, a secondary highlight reel capturing the devastating semantic trap regarding absolute proof versus subjective opinion dominated legal circles online. It triggered massive backlash from working attorneys disgusted by a colleague bastardizing statutory definitions for airtime. One seasoned prosecutor even noted that deploying such falsehoods in a legitimate brief would result in immediate termination. By the first week, the embattled office tried deflecting with a weak press release, hiding behind free speech protections. It was a technically valid but politically disastrous maneuver. It essentially confessed the rhetoric was entirely inaccurate by leaning heavily on the defense that speaking untruths on television remains technically permissible. Surviving on a technicality severely underscored the fundamental difference between legality and integrity. Regulatory watchdogs quickly mobilized. They flooded the commission with demands to investigate whether the synchronized media blitz violated core statutes regarding material misrepresentation. Previous attempts to audit the machine died in bureaucratic gridlock. However, the shifting political tides meant a free pass was no longer guaranteed. Moving into week 2, a nonpartisan accountability group successfully escalated the pressure. They dropped a formal review request onto the desk of the upper chamber's ethics panel, bringing an inquiry with a laser focus. They demanded to know if the aggressive solicitation tactics directly contradicted the restricted intelligence materials he secretly harbored. They questioned whether that contradiction violated the bedrock rules of honest donor engagement. This nonpartisan pressure carried a crushing, inevitable gravity that standard political bickering completely lacks. Simultaneously, mainstream legal panels began dissecting the statutory fraud framework. They broadly concluded that while proving intent in a political arena is incredibly taxing, it is certainly not impossible. Operating in the realm of the merely difficult offers terrible comfort to a potential target. By the third week, the human collateral damage took center stage as the retired mail carrier granted a local television interview from her kitchen, flanked by a cynical campaign magnate preaching the value of truth. She articulated the raw betrayal of a working-class citizen who blindly trusted an elite official. She financed a narrative that federal investigators obliterated. This left her financially depleted without any avenue for recourse. Her quiet heartbreak resonated massively, pulling 5 million views purely because it reflected the very ordinary pain of over 2.4 million citizens who suddenly realized they financed a phantom menace. The collective realization that they bankrolled a disciplined elite who peddled fiction they could never refund struck a devastating chord across the electorate. The core terminology will undoubtedly remain in the politician's arsenal. It will echo through future broadcasts and automated cash grabs because the beast of modern campaigning demands constant feeding. Yet the fundamental power of that promise is permanently broken. It was destroyed the moment an unassuming Southern educator cracked open a dossier and exposed the reality that the most lucrative commodity in the modern republic is a calculated fabrication. That specific promise generated a massive $80 million empire built entirely on the backs of trusting citizens who wrongly assumed an oath carried weight. The vast chasm between political rhetoric and actual reality spanned 7 years and tens of millions of dollars in a calculated deception. It was completely unmasked by a single, meticulously prepared chairman